past several years, the faculty of the school has shared their knowledge and insight to prepare these men and women for their careers in the Rabbinic. This evening, we invite our new colleagues to teach us as we have taught them. The members of the class selected a text to teach us this evening. They studied this text together and have asked one of their classmates, Elan Babchuck, to represent them by sharing their insights. You may follow along in the text, which is printed in your ordination programs on page 2. It is now my pleasure to call forward Elan Babchuck to represent the Ziegler School class of 2012 and to lead the school.
Thank you, Rabbi Artson, for giving me an impossible act to follow. Tonight, I'd like to tell you all about the most difficult test that I took in my entire time at Ziegler. No, Dr. Havivi, it wasn't your merciless Nach exam in which we were tested on 30 complete books of the Tanakh. Dr. Zevit, it wasn't even your grueling 8.5-hour final Bible exam that my study partner Sarah and I barely survived back in December. In fact, the most difficult test that I have taken in my time at Ziegler wasn't even in a classroom at all. It was about 15 months ago, the spring of my penultimate year of school and my first experience working as a hospital chaplain. I could not possibly have been more prepared for this moment. It all started with Rabbi Artson's first-year philosophy class, where I learned a number of thoughtful responses to the question of evil in the world. How can people, we asked, good, honest people, experience pain and loss when there is a loving God up in heaven watching it all happen? Well, through his interpretations of some of the great thinkers in our tradition, Rabbi Artson equipped us with the answers. And then Dr. Havivi taught us precisely which psalms would be appropriate for every possible iteration of every possible ailment known to mankind. If you have a broken pinky finger, that's Psalm 122. If there's a bad case of lice going around your children's kindergarten, Psalm 16. And if there's an infection, well, it depends. If it's bacterial, Psalm 44. If it's viral, absolutely Psalm 45. Now, of course, if the patient wanted to hear some stories to which he or she could relate, I knew the book of Jonah inside and out after hammering away at it with Dr. Zevit for the last 2 years. No matter what the patient was experiencing, I thought naively, I knew precisely which text would bring him or her comfort and meaning. My challenge was that I knew I would betray my lack of experience if I walked around the hospital with a big stack of oversized books. So I did the next best thing. I Googled tiny little miniature versions of all the books. I bought them. I stuck tiny little sticky notes inside of all the books, and in no time at all, I was ready. My first shift was a Thursday evening after a full day of classes. By day, I walked the halls at the American Jewish University, passing my classmates and my rabbis along the way. And by night, I paced back and forth in the wards of the Tarzana Medical Center, peeking in through the narrow glass windows for patients who might be awake and might be in need of a visit. By day, I studied biblical criticism and I pored over modern theological texts. By night, I learned the texts of people's lives and struggled to find ways to bring them comfort in a trying time. By day, I sat in Rabbi Dorf's class and I learned various models of philosophical thought, including when he taught his own model in the third person, which we lovingly call Dorf on Dorf. And by night, I watched firsthand as the doctors and nurses at the hospital put his words on Jewish medical ethics into real-world practice. My first visit was with a woman in her late 50s who had recently gotten bad news about the progression of her cancer. I I read the chart over and over, trying to figure out which text, which psalm, which story might be most comforting to her. And when I felt like I was ready, I took a deep breath, I closed my eyes, and I knocked on the door. When I reopened my eyes, I saw her sitting in an upright chair, gesturing for me to come in. I stepped forward, I introduced myself, and I asked if she would mind me visiting with her for a little bit. She shook her head, she nodded at the chair next to her, she even patted the seat and welcomed me in. Once I sat down, she noticed this little stack of books that I had in my hand with all the sticky notes, and she was not having it. She pointed at the books and she said, "I don't want to hear anything in any of those books." I said, "Don't bother." So I didn't. I didn't read any Psalms with her. I didn't quote any Sadia Gaon. And I didn't even teach her how Jonah survived his experience of suffering stronger than ever. I didn't really know what to quote until it dawned on me that 4 years prior, Rabbi Artson had in fact prepared me for this exact situation. In the first book of the Guide for the Perplexed by Maimonides, we learn that God cannot be described in any positive terms. And therefore, a teacher of Torah must learn to convey the Torah without words. So I did the only thing that I could think of at the time. I offered her my hand. Without a moment's hesitation, she grabbed it, she cradled it in her lap. I squeezed her hand back, and we sat there in silence for what felt like eternity. In the end, it was exactly what she needed in that moment. And as it turns out, it was exactly what I needed too. I learned two things from that experience. First and foremost, it is perfectly fine, even preferable, for rabbis to just be quiet from time to time. Second, was that our tradition will not matter if we don't know how to translate it into the real world. On page 2 of your programs, titled Shiur Text, you'll see the text that our class chose to learn together, to teach to our fellow Zieglerites, and to be represented in my presentation tonight. In this text, we read about a handful of unique and great rabbis, but we learn that Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was the greatest of them all. In his teacher's words, "Im yiyu kol chochmei Yisrael b'kaf moznaim, v'Rabbi Elazar ben Arach b'kaf shniya, machriya et kulam." If all of the sages were on one side of a scale, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach were on the other side, he would outweigh them all. I mean, this guy was a once-in-a-generation sage, a mind unlike any other mind, a rabbi unlike any other rabbi. When it came to learning and teaching the texts of our tradition, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was unparalleled. So why then are there a myriad of texts authored by his colleagues and virtually nothing in his name? How could it be that the single greatest sage of his generation would become the most tragic warning tale for his colleagues? How could it be that he was unable to translate his learning into a legacy, his teaching into a tradition? What happened to him? After his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, passed away, Elazar and his wife moved out of the center of learning and off to the suburbs, where they found idyllic weather, hot springs, and rolling landscapes. Now, while the physical environment was beautiful, the environment for Torah was barren. For all the knowledge that Elazar had and all the texts that he had memorized, he had no idea how to translate them into the real world. So he gave up. He stopped learning, he stopped teaching, and eventually the man who in our text is called a Ma'ayan Hamit Gaber, a flowing spring of Torah, stopped flowing. Of the roughly 5,000 arguments in the Talmud, 4 of them are settled in the following manner. After letting the students argue back and forth until they've covered all of the important issues, the rabbi, rather than giving a ruling, instructs his disciples, Pok, Chazeh ma'ama devar. Go out and see what the people are doing. Stop arguing about these texts, these issues that only exist on paper, and go outside the walls of this Beit Midrash, this house of study, go outside the walls of this city, and find out what the people really need. Figure out how this translates into their lives, to the real world, and then you'll be ready to make a ruling. Then you'll be ready to be their rabbi. Now notice the rabbi's subtle brilliance. He didn't tell his students to go out into the world right away. Rather, he waited until they sat together, studied every text that they could find, considered all the variables, and respectfully debated with one another. Then and only then does he instruct them to go out into the world. Because the world will not need us if we don't know our tradition. And our tradition won't hold water if we don't know how to translate it into the real world. So to myself and to my classmates, we have done the learning. We have pored over the texts of our tradition, and we have argued their merits back and forth. And now it is time, my friends, my colleagues, soon to be my rabbis, to Pok, Chazeh ma'ama devar. Let us go and see what the world needs, and let us translate our texts into their Torah. Thank you. It is now my privilege to call up my classmate, soon to be Rabbi Ronit Tzadok, to lead us in the Kaddish de Rabbanan.